Okay, I want you to do something for me just for a second. Close your eyes. Imagine you're in this huge stadium, but there's no grass, no floodlights. Instead, the ground it's vibrating. I mean, you can literally feel it shaking. And this sound, it's not a crowd. It's this low rhythmic thunder that gets you right in the chest. You look up, and through this golden haze of dust, you see them. 5,000 riders.
And it's not just the number, it's the whole aesthetic of it. You're looking at a sea of vibrant robes, tassels, shields, spears. It's just sensory overload.
Exactly. It feels like a medieval cavalry charge that just appeared in the 21st century. But this isn't a movie set. We're looking at the Agew the Agew Horsemen Festival in Injibara, Ethiopia. And today, we're doing a deep dive into its 86th celebration.
It's such a fascinating topic because, on the surface, it just looks like a parade. A very loud, very colorful parade. But when you start digging into the transcripts, you realize you're looking at something much, much more complex. It's what some people call a living museum.
I've always found that term a bit abstract, like something you'd read in a travel brochure. What does it actually mean here?
Well, think about a normal museum, right? You put an old sword behind glass, it's static, it's dead history. A living museum means the tradition is still breathing, it's still galloping, and most importantly, it's evolving. This isn't just about remembering the past, it's about how that past is actively shaping society today.
And the sheer scale of that organization is what really jumped out at me. We're not talking about some local riding club. The Agew Horsemen Association has over 62,000 registered members. That's the population of a city.
Or a small army. Which is fitting because if you look at the DNA of this group, that's exactly where it began.
Right, so that's our mission for this deep dive. How do you get from a cavalry built for actual war to this massive civic group that's all about a heritage of togetherness and a legacy of peace? How does a war horse become a peacekeeper?
That is the central question, isn't it? It's all about repurposing a tool of war for the work of peace.
So let's start at the beginning. The sources say it was founded in 1932 EC. Now, for anyone listening, that's the Ethiopian calendar.
Right. It's about 7 or 8 years behind the Gregorian one. So 1932 EC puts us around 1940. And the context here is absolutely vital. This is the era of the Italian occupation.
The resistance, the Arbanach.
Exactly. The Patriots. Now, the Agew people have always been horsemen. The terrain, the highlands, the horse was the only way to get around for centuries. But during the occupation, the horse went from being a farm animal to a critical military asset.
Which is so interesting. When you think of World War II, you think of tanks, Blitzkrieg.
Mechanized infantry, yeah. But here you have a resistance that's basically light cavalry. It had to be.
Yeah.
In that terrain, a tank is a liability. It gets stuck. A horse is a lifeline. It's how you moved messages, how you ambushed convoys, how you got away. So this festival wasn't just founded because we like horses. It was, this animal helped us keep our independence.
That makes perfect sense of the origin. But usually, these kinds of veteran groups, they fade away. The parades get smaller. Here it's the total opposite. It starts with maybe 30 people, and now it's 62,000. What happened?
That's where the living museum idea comes back. If it had stayed just a veterans group, it would have died out. But they pivoted. They realized the horse wasn't just a tool of war. It was a symbol of Agew identity. They uncoupled the horse from the war and attached it to the culture.
So the horse basically became the badge of membership for the entire community.
Precisely. And the relationship described in the transcripts goes so far beyond just owner and animal.
Yeah.
It's framed almost as a life partner.
There was that term they used in the broadcast, fisho. That really stuck with me.
Yes, fisho. It's a beautiful concept. It implies a kind of deep emotional intelligence. The idea that the horse understands the heart and mind of its rider.
So it's not just responding to the reins then.
No, not at all. The belief is that if you're grieving, the horse feels it. If you're celebrating, the horse knows. It's a symbiotic bond, and you see it woven into every single part of life.
Okay, let's walk through those. The imagery is just incredible. Let's start with a wedding.
Right. So in a traditional wedding, the horse is central. For the groom, it's his throne. It physically and metaphorically elevates him, but for the bride, it's even more interesting. She also rides, but she's often shaded under a traditional umbrella, a jantilla.
Is that for modesty or protection?
It's about status and reverence. It creates this regal image, but then you flip to the complete opposite end of life, the funeral, and you get this ritual called waje.
This part actually gave me chills. Tell us about waje.
It's a mourning ritual. When a prominent horseman dies, the horse isn't just left in the stable. The horse participates. They drape the animal in mourning attire, dark cloths, and it walks in the funeral procession.
So the idea is that the horse is one of the chief mourners.
Exactly. It's believed the horse shares in the grief. And, I mean, you can imagine the image. The riderless horse in black walking beside the family. It's incredibly powerful.
It really hammers home that idea of the horse as a family member. But let's shift from the somber to the celebratory. The festival itself sounds like an overload for all the senses. We talked about the visuals, but the broadcast spent a lot of time on the smell.
That's a detail you would totally miss in a photo. The women who attend, they're active participants in the whole aesthetic. They wear this beautiful chest ornament called sankadiri, but they also use specific aromatics.
Viridian aids, right?
Yes, Ardinaes. They're traditional plants. So just imagine you have the smell of dust and leather and horses, and then these wafts of herbal perfume moving through the air.
And then there's the sound. The transcript is just full of this one word over and over. Aymolo.
Aymolo, that's the heartbeat of the whole festival.
So what is it? A song? A war cry?
It's a rhythmic chant. Think of it as a call and response. Aymolo is praise, it's a greeting, it's pure high spirits. And when 5,000 riders chant that in unison, it just creates this collective energy. It syncs everyone up.
That synchronization must take a massive amount of physical energy. Which brings us to a part of this deep dive that I think is often overlooked. The food.
I knew we'd get to the food. You can't do a deep dive without checking out the menu.
We have to. And the source material mentioned this dish that sounded almost like a biofuel, abzi.
And in a way, it is a biofuel. Abzi is what you call a cultural superfood. It's not something you eat every day. It's for special events for honored guests.
What's in it?
It's a really complex blend. The sources mention 7 different ingredients. The base is usually flax and nug.
Nug. That's Niger seed.
Correct. Very high in energy. Then you mix in things like cheese, potatoes, a spicy chili paste. It's incredibly dense. You eat it with a thick porridge called genfo.
So it's basically performance nutrition, carb loading and fat loading.
That's exactly what it is. If you're going to be riding for hours chanting Aymolo, a light salad just isn't going to cut it. Abzi gives you that sustained energy.
And there was another one mentioned, chibto.
Chibto is the ultimate utility food. It's basically bread mixed with butter. It's calorie dense, but crucially, it doesn't spoil easily.
The original energy bar.
Pretty much. It was traditionally given to mothers after childbirth to help them regain strength, but it was also the go-to ration for traders and travelers on horseback.
It's amazing how the food is just so perfectly engineered for the lifestyle. But I want to pivot back to the organization. 62,000 members. How do they even manage that?
It's a huge challenge, and they do a lot more than just plan a party once a year. The notes refer to them playing a role in social stability.
Which sounds like code for something.
It's not code, it's a description of a parallel legal system. This was one of the most surprising things for me. The association functions as a traditional court.
Wait, what? So if I have a fight with my neighbor, I don't go to the police. I go to the horsemen.
In many cases, yeah, they have this whole conflict resolution process built in. And because they're so respected, their judgments carry enormous weight. They handle reconciliation between feuding families.
But why would people choose them over the actual legal system?
Trust, I think.
Yeah.
And speed. The formal system can be slow and feel disconnected. The association is local. They know the people involved. They stop conflicts before they escalate.
That's incredible. It's a civic group that's actually filling the gaps left by the state.
And it's democratic. You'd think, given the military roots, it would be top-down. But it's not. The whole structure is electoral.
How does that work?
It starts at the village level, the kibele. Members elect their local leaders. Those leaders then elect the next level up, and so on, all the way to the zone. It's a representative democracy inside a cultural festival.
That's just a profound shift. A military structure running on democratic principles.
And that's why their theme, the legacy of peace, isn't just some nice slogan. They are actively doing the work of peace building by resolving these local conflicts.
It really challenges what we think traditional groups do. It's not just ceremonial, it's functional. It actually works.
It works because it adapts. Which brings us to the future. The big news from the festival this year is their bid for UNESCO recognition.
To be listed as an intangible cultural heritage.
And they're in the final stages, according to the transcripts. Getting that UNESCO stamp is huge. It brings funding, protection, international prestige.
But with that attention comes modernization. And there was this one moment in the parade that I thought just perfectly captured that tension.
The tractors.
The tractors. I did a double take. They paraded modern farm tractors right alongside the horses.
It's a jarring image, isn't it? But the analysis in the source explains it perfectly. It's not a contradiction, it's a transition. For centuries, the horse pulled the plow. It did the hard labor.
So bringing in the tractors.
It frees the horse. By mechanizing the agriculture, they're essentially retiring the horse from the drudgery of farm work. This allows the horse to be elevated to a purely cultural symbol.
That is such a smart way of looking at it. Usually we think technology kills tradition, but they're saying, no, the tractor does the work, so the horse can be the glory.
Exactly. Preservation through adaptation. We use tractors to farm, but we use horses to be Agew.
And that links right into their economic plans. They're pivoting to tourism.
Huge potential there. The geography is stunning. You've got Lake Zengina.
I looked it up. It's a crater lake, incredibly green.
It is. So they're pitching this dual strategy: adventure tourism, hiking, trekking, and agro-tourism. The area is famous for potatoes and honey.
So the pitch is, come for the 5,000 horses, stay for the crater hike and the honey tasting.
And the Absi. But seriously, the economic impact is massive. A festival this size stimulates the entire local economy. The tailors, the saddle makers, the hotels, they're even building a complex to generate rental income.
It's a complete ecosystem. You pull on this one thread, the horse, and you find the legal system, the food, the economy, the democratic process.
That's what I love about this. It just refutes the idea that tradition is this fragile, delicate thing.
Yeah.
We treat heritage like it's a porcelain vase that will break if you touch it. The Agew Horsemen show that tradition is more like leather. It's tough, it's flexible, you can reshape it, and it still holds together.
So if we pull back, what's the big takeaway? Why does a horse festival in Ethiopia matter to someone listening anywhere else in the world?
I think it forces us to rethink what it means to keep history alive. We often think preservation means freezing the past, just doing exactly what our ancestors did. But the Agew Horsemen prove that true preservation is about utility.
Utility, yeah.
Yeah. For a tradition to survive, it has to be useful to the people living today. If they had insisted the organization stay just a veterans group, it would have died with the last soldier.
Instead, they let the war horse become a peacekeeper. They let the plow horse become a parade horse.
They allowed the function to change so the spirit could survive. They made the tradition pay its rent, in the 21st century.
That's a powerful lesson for any culture, really. Adapt or die.
Absolutely. And for you listening, I would just challenge you to go online and search for Agew Horsemen Festival. Seeing the sheer color and energy. It's just a reminder that history isn't only in books. Sometimes it's loud, it's dusty, and it's galloping right in front of you.
A living museum indeed. Thanks for guiding us through that. It was fascinating.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for taking the deep dive with us. We'll catch you on the next one. Keep exploring.
Lemdatake kama suritis kaltanti guzmiske berestau sago feresten kau baulo kanti kama gerzikinu ngishu susat kanti kama gizikinu firisiu sa gug soranta gidit kama lilit ngu qadimi waches